Lesson 4. Downloading and managing your market data. If you remember one thing from the last few lessons, I want it to be this. A backtest is only as honest as the data you feed it. You can write the cleverest strategy in the world, but if the historical data has holes in it, or covers the wrong period, or uses a time frame that doesn't match how you actually want to trade, the numbers that come out are meaningless. They'll look precise. They'll be lies. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about data, where it comes from, how to get it into Freqtrade, how to pick the right time frame, how to store it sensibly, and how to keep it fresh. This isn't the glamorous part of quant trading. Nobody retires on a yacht talking about candle storage formats, but it is the layer everything else stands on, so it is worth getting right once and not thinking about it again. Timeframes, and why they matter more than you think. Let's start with the most important decision you'll make about your data, which is the time frame. A time frame is just the length of time represented by each candle on a chart. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day, that is it. But the choice shapes everything else about your trading, so let me walk you through what actually changes. Think about a 1-minute chart first. Every minute produces a new candle. That means a single day gives you over 1,400 candles. A month gives you around 43,000. There is a lot of signal in there and a lot of noise. You'll see dozens of tiny patterns a day and your bot will fire constantly. Now think about the cost side. Every trade pays a fee, and on a 1-minute chart, the fee can easily eat most of the small profits each move produces. You are also racing against latency, because on a chart that fast, a 1-second delay can turn a winner into a loser. And psychologically, watching a bot make 100 trades a day is brutal. Even when it is automated. Now go to the other end. A daily chart. 1 candle per Dalton Yai. A month gives you 30 candles. You'll take maybe a couple of trades a week if that. The signals are much cleaner because each candle digests a full day of activity. But each trade also carries real overnight risk, because anything can happen between the close of one candle and the close of the next. Capital efficiency is lower too, because your money sits idle for long stretches. Most beginners, and honestly most retail quant traders, end up in the middle. 5-minute, 15-minute, 1-hour charts. They're fast enough to give you a decent number of trades so you actually see results, but slow enough that the noise isn't drowning the signal and the fees aren't eating all the profit. If you are just starting out, my honest recommendation is to anchor on 5-minute or 15-minute data. Use 1 hour as a secondary time frame to confirm the broader trend, and download somewhere between 30 and 90 days to begin with. That is enough to iterate on a strategy without your laptop melting. The deeper principle here is a trade-off that never goes away. Smaller timeframes give you more data points and more trades, but more noise and more cost. Larger timeframes give you cleaner signals but fewer trades and bigger overnight risk. You don't escape this by picking a magic number. You just pick a spot on the line that fits your time, your capital, and your temperament. Actually downloading the data, all right. Let's get concrete. Once Freqtrade is installed and your condo environment is active, downloading data is one command. The simplest version goes like this. You tell Freqtrade which config file to use, how many days back you want, and which time frame. That is it. It reaches out to the exchange, pulls the candles, writes them to disk, and prints how many it grabbed. A nice detail worth knowing. If you ask for the last 30 days and then a week later run the same command asking for 30 days again, Freqtrade is smart enough to only fetch the missing week. It doesn't re-download everything. That is called incremental updating. And it saves you a surprising amount of time and bandwidth once you start pulling data for dozens of pairs. You can also be specific about which pairs you want. By default it uses whatever's in your config file, but you can pass a list on the command line. Things like BTC USDT, ETH-USDT, BNB USDT, and it'll only grab those. Or you can write the list into a separate file, which is handy when you start working with 20 or 50 pairs at once, and typing them all out gets old. For the time range, you've got 2 ways to specify it. The first is days, which counts backwards from today. Say 30 and you get the last 30 days. The second is a specific date range, and this is the one I'd encourage you to use for serious work. You give it a start and end date, like the 1st of September through the 30th, and it fetches exactly that window. The reason this matters is reproducibility. If you tune a strategy and then tell someone, I tested it on the last 30 days, That means a different thing next week. If you say, I tested it on September 2025, everyone's talking about the same period. For comparing strategies fairly, dates beat relative days. One small thing about the date format. Freqtrade uses a compact form like 20,250,901 for the 1st of September 2025. You can leave the end open to mean up to now, or leave the start open to mean everything before this date. Small detail, easy to forget, comes up constantly. Choosing a storage format here is a decision most people don't realize they're making until they've already made it the wrong way. Freqtrade stores your data in either JSON or Parquet, and the choice actually matters. JSON is the default. It is plain text, human-readable, and easy to debug. If you open a JSON data file in a text editor, you'll see rows of numbers in brackets, each row a candle with a timestamp. The open, high, low, close, and the volume. You can eyeball it, you can grep it, you can write quick scripts against it. The downside is size. JSON is verbose. A single pair of 1-year 5-minute data is around 24 megabytes, and once you scale to 50 pairs across multiple timeframes, you are looking at multiple gigabytes. Reading it back in is also relatively slow, because the computer has to pass all that text. Parquet is the other option, and it is the one I'd actually recommend. It is a compressed binary format, so the files are much smaller, often 60 to 80% smaller than JSON. It also loads much faster, because it is laid out for exactly the kind of column-based reads that backtesting wants to do. The catch is that you can't open a Parquet file in a text editor and read it. It is not human-readable. But honestly, once you trust the system, you almost never need to. You switch formats by adding 2 lines to your config file telling Freqtrade to write Parquet instead of JSON. And from then on, every download uses it. If you are just starting with 1 pair and 30 days of data, JSON is fine. The moment you start scaling up, switch to Parquet. The difference is dramatic. 50 pairs across a year of multiple timeframes drops from around 2 gigabytes in JSON to roughly 500 megabytes in Parquet. That is not just disk space, it is also how long a backtest takes to start up, where your data lives, and how to check it. Freqtrade keeps everything under a data folder inside your user directory, organized by exchange. If you are using Binance, all your Binance data sits in one folder, with one file. Per Pascal IR per timeframe. The naming is predictable, something like BTC_USDT-5M.Parquet. Once you've seen it once, it is obvious. There is a useful command called list data that shows you what you've actually got. You run it, and it prints a table of every pair, every timeframe, the start and end dates of the data you have, and how many candles. I use this all the time. It answers questions like, did that download finish? Do I actually have a full year of ETH data? Or did it cut off in March? Did I already grab the 1-hour candles for this pair? Or am I about to re-download them? That last one is important, because of a subtlety that bites people. If your strategy uses 15-minute candles, but you only downloaded 5-minute data, the backtest doesn't gracefully fall back. It errors out, because the time frame it needs simply isn't there. So before you run a backtest and wonder why it failed, run list data first. 9 times out of 10, the problem is a missing timeframe or a gap in the data. Gaps are worth dwelling on. Exchanges go down. Networks hiccup. Rate limits kick in mid-download. The result is that sometimes a chunk of candles is simply missing from the middle of your file, and you won't notice unless you look. Freqtrade has a flag you can pass to list data that shows the full time range and lets you spot these. If you find a gap, the fix is just to re-download that range, optionally with a flag that forces it to overwrite what is there rather than skipping. Dirty data is one of the quiet ways a backtest lies to you. A gap in the middle of a critical move can make a strategy look brilliant or terrible, depending on which side of the gap the simulated trade landed. Get into the habit of checking. Keeping data up to date. Market data has a shelf life. If you downloaded 90 days back in January and you are still backtesting against that same file in June, you are testing on data that is increasingly stale relative to current market conditions. Strategies drift. Volatility regimes change. You want your backtests to reflect something close to the world your bot will actually trade in. The simplest pattern is to update weekly. Pick a day, run the download command with the last 7 days, and let incremental updating fill in whatever's missing. That keeps your local copy within a week of live without much effort. If you want to automate it, both Linux and macOS have cron, and Windows has Task Scheduler. You can set up a job that runs the download command every night at 2 in the morning, pulling the last week of data, and you never think about it again. One small piece of advice if you go this route. Always use absolute paths in your cron entry. The job runs in a minimal environment, and a relative path that works fine in your terminal will silently fail at 2 a.m. because cron doesn't know where your config file is. I learned that one the hard way. How much history should you keep around? For actively working on a strategy, 30 to 90 days is enough to iterate quickly. Because backtests are fast and you'll be running them constantly. For validation, once you think a strategy might be real, you want at least 6 months. Ideally a year, so you've seen it survive different market conditions, trending periods, choppy periods, a crash or two. For production, where you are trading real money, you want multiple years if you can get it. Because the more regimes your backtest has lived through, the more you can trust that it isn't just tuned for one lucky stretch. And periodically, clean up. Delete data for pairs you are no longer trading. Old timeframes you downloaded for a strategy you abandoned. Anything older than a year that you are not actively using. It is tempting to hoard, but data you are not using just makes your list data output noisy and your backups slow. Things that go wrong. Let me end with the failures I see most often, because they're all avoidable. The first is downloading the wrong pair name. Exchanges are picky about formatting. Binance wants BTC/USDT, not BTC cust, not BTC_USDT. If you get it wrong, you'll get an error saying the exchange doesn't support that pair. Freqtrade has a command that lists all the pairs an exchange actually offers for a given quote currency. So when in doubt, check. The second is rate limiting. Exchanges throttle how much you can pull per minute. If you try to download 50 pairs at 1-minute resolution for a full year in one go, you'll almost certainly hit the limit partway through, and the download will slow to a crawl or fail. The fix is mostly patience, and occasionally breaking the job into chunks. If you are on a slow connection or hitting limits, you can also route through a proxy, though I'd only bother with that if downloads are genuinely unusable. The third is disk space. It creeps up on you. You start with one pair, then you add 10, then you grab a few more time frames, then a year of data, and suddenly your drive is full, and you can't figure out why. Parquet helps a lot here, as does periodic cleanup. The rule of thumb I use is that JSON at 50 pairs and a year of multiple timeframes is around 2 gigabytes, and Parquet brings that down to 500 megabytes. Not huge in absolute terms, but easy to forget about. The fourth, and this is the one I want you to actually remember, is trusting data you haven't checked. A backtest result is only as good as the data underneath it. If the data has holes, the backtest is fiction. If the data covers a single lucky month, the backtest is fiction. If the time frame doesn't match your strategy, the backtest errors out, which is at least an honest failure. The dangerous ones are the silent failures, where the numbers look great and the underlying data is subtly broken. Get in the habit of glancing at list data before any backtest you care about. It takes 5 seconds and it'll save you from pretending a broken result is real. That is the lesson. The mechanics of downloading data are simple. One command and a few flags. The judgment is harder. Picking a time frame that matches your trading style, choosing a storage format that scales, keeping data fresh, and checking it for gaps before you trust it. Get those right, and the rest of the course, the actual backtesting and strategy work, has solid ground to stand on. In the next lesson, we'll finally run a real backtest on real data, and start making sense of the numbers that come out.